My name is Sen-Foong Lim. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a game designer from London, Ontario, Canada, which is, as I said before, about 2.5 hours south of Toronto. We're actually further south than a lot of places in America where I am. I live like in this little part of Canada that like dips down into America. My day job, I'm a therapist and a professor, so I teach psychology at a college here in Canada. And I use that a lot. That informs my game design quite a bit in terms of incentivization. So my biggest thing when I'm making games is how do I get people to have the experience that I thought they should have? And a lot of that is done through psychology and player psychology. So analyzing what player psychology is and then thinking about what is my game doing to, help people feel or think or act the way that I want them to. So basically, like Louise was saying about experience design or user experience, that's sort of the avenue that I take when I look at game design. So I collaborate a lot. I don't ever publish alone. I don't think I've ever done a solo game design ever since I started this about 15 odd years ago. And the reason why I don't is because I don't have the time to do that. I just really don't. I would have about probably less than half of the games that I have published if I just did it myself, I bet. And I bet I wouldn't even have that many because they wouldn't be as good. I believe heavily in co-design. So when I started co-designing with my best friend, Jay, who is out in Vancouver, it was because he was out in Vancouver that we started designing together. He had moved out, he had got a job, and he had left Ontario to move to Vancouver. And we used to live together during university and college. And then, I went and got married and he went and got a job. So we figured we should design games because we had tried before. I'll show you. I keep this right next to my desk because I often show this. This is our very first prototype, and it's a piece of poop. It's bad. It's real bad. You don't ever want to have to play this game because it's so bad that we put it on a shelf and let it sit there for like probably about 5 years before we seriously thought about designing games again. And it was only because Jay moved away. And because he moved away, we couldn't design in person. We had to design like this, like what we're doing now in COVID times. We had to design over a long distance. It's like 3,470 odd kilometers, like between my house and his house. It's literally like 2-3 days of travel. Like if you had to drive it, you wouldn't want to. It's a long flight. So we had to use telecommunications. And back 15 years ago, there wasn't this nice video conferencing. I mean, there was, but it'd be like a frame rate of like 15 frames per second instead of like whatever we're at now, like 60, 120. And so it was horrible. And we'd have to type everything out. We used a forum, just like a bulletin board system, where it was just he and I on that bulletin board. But it was amazing because what it did, and I think it can do this for anybody who co-designs or anybody who shares their design vision and intention online somewhere, it makes you accountable to that vision. Like I actually have to articulate it and put it into words. And when I did that, and when we did that, what happened is we would basically sharpen our swords against each other because Jay would always wake up in the morning and read my post that I did at night, or vice versa. And he'd say, well, what did you mean by that? And I would ask him the same thing. What do you mean by that thing you wrote? And we'd have to explain ourselves to each other because we weren't in physical space together. We couldn't show each other, graphically what we meant. There was really none of that either. Like it was really actually hard to import a graphic into this bulletin board system we were using. And so we had to use words, which is actually really powerful because if I can't explain my game to a person who I'm co-designing with, maybe it doesn't deserve to be a game, right? Because if you can't teach somebody what you're trying to get across, that is a sign that maybe it's too complex, or maybe you're using way too many like words. And so I think our early process of designing by distance actually really helped our career. You might think that, oh, that would really stifle people's career, but I think it helped us learn to, like I said, articulate our ideas in a much better way. And so I think that's a big pro of collaborative design, so much so that I design with several other people. I have published designs with Jesse Wright, who used to live in London, but now lives in Kitchener-Waterloo. So we did Mutants and Kingdom Rush together, and a bunch of other things like Batman, the animated series game. So, and then Erica and Jesse are co-hosts of mine on the Maple Syrup Show. So if you ever get a chance, it's at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it'd be at 8 p.m. for you, I think. And it's on Facebook. We just stream live to Facebook for an hour, and we interview other designers and other publishers and all sorts of people in the industry. And we talk about design from the designer's perspective, and we talk about whatever industry thing is happening, but always from the perspective of a designer. So if it's a publisher, we're asking like, so how do designers pitch to you? Or if we're talking to a convention runner, we're saying, okay, so what's at that convention that would entice designers to go? So the Maple Syrup Show, if you look it up, just maple syrup, like maple syrup that you pour on pancakes, because we're Canadian, but Meeple, because we're game designers. If you look that up on Facebook, you can find us every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. And I think this week, we're talking to Danny Lowe. Danny is the social media person from Pandasaurus Games. They just closed their Dinosaur World. They made over $1 million on their Kickstarter. So we're going to have a lot to talk about, probably a million things to talk about with her on Wednesday. And that's something that we do together. And because we work together so well, Eric and I are designing a game. I can't mention what it is. Jesse and I are working on other games all the time. So I think co-design is a really strong way to get things done. The problem with co-design, the con, I guess, is that you have to communicate with somebody else, but I think that's a problem. The con is that, you make half the money or a third of the money in the case of something like Dungeons and Dragons, Rock, Paper, Wizards that I did with Jay and our friend Josh Capel. You might know Josh as the graphic designer on everything. Like he was the original Pandemic graphic designer. That's how long he's been in the business. But Jay, Josh, and I are good friends, and we made this game together. But because there's three of us, we're splitting a very small percentage between all three of us. And because it's Dungeons and Dragons, the percentage is super small because the company pays out a lot to license from Wizards of the Coast, of course, because Dungeons and Dragons is an immense property. It's huge. So I think the idea of working with other people, it has to suit you. If you're the kind of person who likes to be in control, it's not for you. If you're the type of person who is not good at explaining yourself, maybe it is for you in the future, but the first couple of times you do it, it's going to be rough because you're going to butt heads with each other as you try to explain things to each other. So I don't know if you know Gil Hova. Gil Hova is one of the hosts of Ludology, and he's a publisher under Formal Ferret. That's the house that he runs, the imprint that he owns. So High Rise is his current game that's on Kickstarter. And he's most probably known for like the networks. But he won't co-design with anybody because he had a very bad experience co-designing with somebody once, where that person would kind of just show up and then do nothing, I guess was the situation. But because of that experience, it soured Gil forever. But Gil's also the kind of guy who likes to have things the way he likes to have them. And so I think it depends on your personality a lot. Like if you are gregarious by nature, like if you like having people around you, if you kind of gain energy from talking about things and bouncing ideas off of other people, then co-design may be something that you want to try out. If you haven't tried out, just by a show of hands on camera, people who I can see, Who co-designs right now? Does anybody co-design? Sometimes some people going, yeah, maybe, maybe not. It's something that, you know, if you have a chance, give it a shot. It's an experience, right? And then you can just figure out if you like it or not. But I've had a lot of success doing it. And like I said, I don't think any game that I would have come up alone using the exact same theme or the exact same mechanics would have ended up being as good as it is now. So I think I have like three or four games in like the top 1,000. Can't remember, maybe two to three. Yeah, that's probably more correct. And the top 1,000 of BGG is like really good. Like it's remarkably good. Like I didn't realize this until somebody said, you know, that's like out of like 10,000, 15,000 games. So if you're in the top 1,000, that's pretty respectable, right? You know, you always think about, oh, I want to be number one, but you know, having in the top 1,000, you're still in the top like 10% of all games ever, right? In the history of ever, and that's pretty decent to recognize that. That comes for me, anyways, from collaborating. And I know some people don't collaborate, but the thing is that when you really think about it, if you're game designing and you're play testing and you're getting play tester feedback, that's all co-designing really is. It's getting another person's feedback and then acting on it. But they're also helping you or working with you alongside you as equal partners. And I think that's where, you know, situations like Gil had where it didn't seem equal, that's where it gets kind of rough. So a lot of it is just communication. And that's actually what I study as a psychology professor, and I study communication sciences. And so behavior and communication being my areas of expertise, that's where, you know, all problems are solved, but all problems also start with communication, I think. And if you can get better at that, then you'll be better at collaborating. And I mean, not only that, communication is actually essential for game design when you think about it, right? When you think about the experience that you're trying to sell somebody, I view games, this is how I think about games. I think about games like they are experiences that I've had that I want to package, put in a box, and give to you as the end customer. And if I can't translate to you through pictures, graphics, icons, words, what that experience is, I've failed. I haven't done my job. And that's all communication, right? So game design is really highly focused, intentional communication about an experience that you want somebody to have with these pieces and things that you've put in a box. That's all a game really is if you boil it down. And so what I'm saying is that learning how to communicate with other people by working with them is a way to actually strengthen your skills in communicating those ideas to other people when you're not there in the room, where you can't say, oh, but this is what I meant, right? Because games don't come, as we know, with the designer in the box. That'd be super nice. If we could clone everybody, put you in the box, great, we're done. But they don't work like that. So we have to be really good at that. And then when we get into multilingual situations, like today even, we have to understand that it's the intention, not necessarily the exact words, that is more important. And so communicating that intent is really, really important. And so those of you in the room who are graphic designers, that's where you come in. You know, that is the key thing. I often talk about the difference between illustration and graphic design. And I design games with like absolutely no illustration. I'm just looking for a prototype. Oh, here, this is a prototype. This is a game that we're developing for a company right now. And as you can see, there's graphic design on it, but there's no illustration. The final copy will have like tons of character illustrations. Like this guy's, I don't know who this is. Oh, this is like a magic user casting a spell. And you know, this will be an archer with a bow and all that kind of stuff. But you don't need that to design the game. You don't even need it to play the game. You need it to immerse yourself in the game, and it's going to give you maybe some narrative hooks that can inform you, you know, oh, that's the one where he has like two bows, two arrows that he's shooting at the same time. So this must be a multi-shot situation. So sometimes, yes, you can get that information from the illustration, but if you don't have that information in icons and or words, it doesn't matter what the illustration shows, right? So build your games up from the foundational levels first before you think about illustration and all that kind of stuff. I mean, do think about that because that is part of the whole package. That's part of your vision. That's part of the experience. But it's not core to the experience of the game actually working, right? So graphic design communicates the intent without words, which is why it's really, really important to focus on that. And I find a lot of game designers, maybe novice game designers, spend too much time worrying about illustration, right? And how pretty it looks. And those aren't pretty. This is not pretty. This is just functional, right? It tells you exactly what the number, this is an initiative track. So how fast the card is played, and it tells you what the effect is, and that's it. And if I wasted time drawing that, or because I can't draw very well, it would take a long time, or putting art and stuff on there, I'd never get it to the table. And getting it to the table is like the most important thing. So in terms of getting published, I think we can move on to that. Let's think about the things that we're moving on to. I'm just looking at the list that Pepe asked me to go through. Okay, so tips for being published. One is make relationships, and understand that the first time you make a relationship with somebody, it's not to get published, right? So I'm a very, very firm believer in selling yourself. And that doesn't mean like, you know, doing anything for that person. That doesn't mean, you know, trying to be kind of like a used car salesman about yourself and say, hey, I'm awesome and blah, blah, blah. That's not what it's about. It's really about presenting a professional front, that you have a persona that is professional. And the reason why that's really important is because a company may not like your game, but if they like you, they will come back to you again and again. They will be willing to accept your pitches. They will be willing to spend time with you. They will be willing to give you feedback. They will be, some of them will actually look for you when they have a job opportunity, if they like you. Whether or not they've signed a game of yours, if they like you, they're gonna be like, hey, I wanna work with you. I've never liked a single game you've made, or maybe I like them, but they're not for our company, but I really want to work with you. And so when you're wondering like, oh, how did you get to design for Batman? And how did you get to design for Kingdom Rush? So do you guys know Kingdom Rush, the app game? It's actually, I think it's from Uruguay. I think Ironhide is a company from Uruguay. Anyway, it's got like over 1 million downloads on the App Store. It's this huge, huge property. And they've had like 4 games in the line. And the way that we got to do that game is that the publisher Lucky Duck liked us. Like, it's not, we also made a really good game, don't get me wrong. But when we first we made a game with them called Mutants, and they liked what we did, they liked how we work. And when the Vince, who is the owner of Lucky Duck, asked us, okay, so do you have anything you'd like to work on? We said, can you get Kingdom Rush? Because at the time, Lucky Duck had been very focused on doing app conversions to the tabletop. So taking video games and apps and making board games out of them, which is why they have like Fruit Ninja and Jetpack Joyride are in their line. And so Kingdom Rush just fit naturally into that. They're getting out of the app conversion world now, but that was where they started. And so, and also, I mean, Kingdom Rush was huge for them. We were over $1 million on Kingdom Rush 1. So that all came out of us just being professional. He saw us do one game, he liked it, but more than he liked the game, he liked us. And he realized that we were, you know, people who could deliver, people who were professional in our communication, timely, and that was really important because it led to our biggest financial success, I guess, in a single shot. So when you have a really good relationship with publishers, that's what can happen. I get calls from publishers to say, hey, are you familiar with whatever? Like Scooby-Doo, when I made the Scooby-Doo game with Jay, they said, are you familiar with Scooby-Doo? And we're like, yes, Scooby-Doo is our favorite cartoon ever. And they said, oh, okay, good, because we want you to make a game about Scooby-Doo. And here's what we're thinking. And then they give us some parameters, and we tell them what we think, and then we make the game. But if we didn't have a good relationship with that company, and we had never made a game for the op before, for USA Opoly, we had pitched to them before, but people who work there, who have clout and say at the company, have been our friends for many, many years. And so when an opportunity came up to work with them, and they wanted us to work with them, they asked us. They literally just found us at a convention and said, hey, we have an idea, and we think you'd be great for it. And that's just presenting the professional front, where no matter what you do, whether they say yes or no to your game, you are super professional with them. And it doesn't, it's funny because a lot of people think professionalism or selling yourself means saying yes to everything they ask you, or taking a very low cut on a contract because you want the job. And really all professionalism is setting boundaries. That's all it is being very professional about your boundaries. So like when Pepe asked me to come talk, I said, okay, great, I can do that. But if I come talk at the time you said, I'll only have this much time. Is that okay? He said, no. We want maybe longer than that, maybe. I said, okay, well then we have to move it. And we just negotiated that. And that's setting boundaries. And we're not enemies, right? We're not fighting with each other over this. That'd be silly. Why would we do that? And if it didn't happen today, it would have happened some other time. But just being professional is setting those boundaries for yourself. And it also means saying no to things, which is hard, right? When a publisher asks me to do something and I quoted them, like on a development contract, I quoted one publisher, $350 to start, which is my start fee, right? It's just like, I need to make 10 hours worth of money to make this worthwhile at all for me to do. Like if you just ask me to do an hour, chances are I've actually done 2 hours on it, right? But you're only paying me like 35 US. No. So it's like a $35 times 10 hours. That's my start fee. And a publisher came back and said, well, it's a really small game, and like you're gonna have to, give me a deal on that. It's like, no, I don't have to. I don't want to. And I'm sorry, that's my fee. And I just said, if you go ask other developers here, I'll give you these other developers who I know. You can reach out to them, see if they'll do it for less. I pretty much guarantee you they're going to have similar rates, which are about $30 to $40 an hour. And most of them have a 5 to 10 hour minimum start fee. So you're welcome to go look for other people. And that's just being professional. And now I can still talk to that person. I don't have to say, well, you ruined my game, or I ruined your game, or, you ripped me off. There's none of that. It's just we didn't have that particular contract signed, and that's okay. What about this next one? So being professional is being able to navigate those fields. And it's hard for game designers, I think, because we want so much for our games to be released, our games to be shown to the world, that sometimes we're willing to walk into contracts that aren't necessarily in our best interest. And so I realize that I'm saying a lot of this stuff from a place of privilege, where I am a known designer in the industry, where people say, oh, we want a game done by that guy. And if you're not in that position, you might want to take anything that comes your way. And the thing is that you just have to watch out. You just have to be very aware of situations where you're not getting a fair shake. And so if you ever get a contract and you say, hey, I don't know if this is fair, just reach out and I'll help you through that. I don't mind giving advice about contracts. I'm not a lawyer, but I've seen tons and tons of them. And I can tell you what's fair and what's unfair in a lot of ways. So when you're published, or when you're pitching to be published, that's different than when you're pitching when you're published, right? You have that back catalog of work, that body of evidence that shows you can do stuff. And so I think pitching, like I said, is very much about you. But then let's talk about actually pitching your game. Right now it's hard, obviously, as we know. We're not able to go to conventions. And even if we were going to go to conventions, a lot of conventions where most of the publishers are don't happen in Latin America, right? Which is kind of sad. It's a new market, it's a fresh market. Maybe they'll start going there, I don't know. I know that there's been definitely problems with shipping games to South America. So I'm wondering what the industry thinks about that as general, or if they're going to say, hey, let's go there. I do know that there's a couple companies that are localizing, games from European and American companies to bring down to South America, which is great, and into Mexico, which is great. So, I mean, things are happening, but it's a sort of not backwards, but almost backwards way of you come to us. We're always traveling. So because I'm Canadian and you're Mexican, or other parts of Latin America, we're always trying to converge on America, right? Which is kind of disappointing when you look at the quality and the number of people in Latin America and in Canada who are designing great games. Maybe it should be the other way around. And so that's what things like the Pitch Project are all about. The Pitch Project is a thing that I'm doing with Jay Cormier to basically help people who aren't linked up yet get linked up with publishers, right? So the Pitch Project, the idea is that we're basically making the LinkedIn of game design. That's the hope. It doesn't look like that now, and I know Ruben is on it, I know Pepe is on it, and it's not like that particularly yet. But the end goal is for it to be sort of this clearinghouse of ideas where designers can put their games and their sell sheets and their print and play files and have them available for publishers to look through. Publishers can go look for designers, but also graphic designers can put their portfolios up there, illustrators, modelers to do 3D modeling for miniatures. Manufacturers can even have a system set up there, hopefully to do RFQs, requests for quotes, through this whole idea. So it's a long time coming. It's very far in the future. But the Pitch Project is really the start of all that. The idea is, can we get people together virtually to learn about how to pitch to publishers and therefore get to pitch to publishers? Or when they do get to pitch to publishers, they'll know a little bit more about the industry rather than, spending several $1,000s, to be honest, to travel to, say, Gen Con in the States, spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on food and accommodations and travel, and then just to go to pitch to somebody who you don't know and you've never done it before. That's a huge risk, for people. Even though going to Gen Con is super fun and you like games, it's great. But if your purpose is to get pitched or get pitching to people, then maybe having some skills before you go would be good too. Or learning how to do it online, which is what we're doing right now. So the idea of pitching is to show your best game. And to show your best game, you need to do some research. And to do some research, you got to know who's going to be at the table with you. Who's the publisher? What kind of games do they like? What kind of games don't they like? Without making any assumptions, just based on their catalog, right? And putting your best foot forward. So just like a game is an experience, a pitch is an experience. And you want everybody to leave the pitch happy. You as a designer need to leave happy. They as the publisher need to leave happy. And that could totally mean nothing gets signed. That's okay. A happy pitch meeting means that you communicated your intent to them, they understood that, and they appreciated it. That's all a good pitch meeting is. And now you have another card, another name in your Rolodex. I don't think people actually have Rolodexes anymore, but when you did have one, you put your card in it, their card in it. And now you have another contact in the industry. That is a win. Anything else is like gravy, as we say in Canada. I don't know what the saying would be where you are from, but yeah, we'd say the rest is all gravy. It's the topping, it's the icing on the cake, right? So the idea here when you're pitching is to put your best foot forward. So you want to have a game that the publisher would be most likely to publish. What that means is, like, let's say we're pitching to Renegade Games. If you know Renegade Games, you might know their catalog. You might say, oh, Renegade seems to be into X, Y, and Z. So I won't pitch them A, B, and C yet. I'll pitch them games that are in the X, Y, and Z category. And we do that. And maybe nothing there is interesting to them. And they say, well, what else do you have? here's a trick. Don't say, oh, you wouldn't want these games. Let them figure that out. Say, oh, I have this and this and this. And they might say, oh, yeah, we don't do kids games, or we don't do dexterity games. And that's fine, but at least you got to show them to them. If you say, well, you know, I've never seen this in Renegade's game catalog, so I'm not going to show it to you, that's just shooting yourself in the foot. Don't do that. You have the audience, let them see it, but don't force it on them. Let them find that out. I think that's actually a really good kind of general piece of advice. Don't force things on people. So a lot of times, you know, when we're pitching, we'll say hyperbolic stuff like, this is the best game ever, or this beats, you know, Gloomhaven hands down, or this is how I improved Monopoly. Don't say things like that, because nobody believes you. First, they don't believe you, because these are games that are like #1 on the list, or have been selling thousands and thousands of units for decades. So how could you possibly come up with something better? Now, that's not to say that you didn't. It's to say that don't say that kind of stuff. Why? Because you're going to fall flat more than you're going to actually stand up with. You'll be able to prop back that saying up. And so just it's not saying, you know, downplay things. It's not saying be humble. It's saying be realistic. Like I had a sell sheet come across my table the other day that said the first game ever to do this, and it's like, probably, maybe, but also maybe not. Like I could say if I spent maybe a half hour Googling, maybe I could find a game that did that. And is that worth me now thinking that you're a liar? You know, that you actually just literally lied to me to do that? Because I don't want to work with liars. So if I'm a publisher and I see somebody being hyperbolic, I tend not to believe them. Publishers tend to be risk aversive, actually. They tend to not want to spend any money at all, whatever. But when they see something they know that they like, then they spend oodles of money on that, right? So no money at all on anything, but if I like it, all the money in the world gets put towards that. And so the more that you're truthful, the more you're able to show them that these are things that you'll like, the more that they're willing to get that, right? To sign it, to budget for it, to put art into it, to market it. And so that whole idea of putting your best foot forward means not being hyperbolic, but showing people games that they want to see. And then even when you take that down just another level into the actual pitch, stack your deck, totally stack your deck. Like, don't start off from a random experience. Start off from the best experience possible. Give that publisher, you have maybe 20 minutes total with the publisher, but honestly, you probably only have about 5 minutes to capture them. After that, you'll see them kind of like looking at their phone or looking at their watch if they don't like what they're seeing. But if you caught them, you have another 15, 10, 20 minutes to like finish the deal, right? But in that first 5 minutes, you have to pitch them the hook. So one of the problems that I often see is that designers spend way too long talking about all the little mechanics in their games, like, and then we deal 5 cards, and then we roll 2 dice, and then we do, without telling me what's the actual biggest, best part of this game. Tell me that. That's what I want to know. I want to know the thing that is in your game that is unlike any other game, or even if it is in other games, it's done quite differently, or that stands out. You know, what is the hook of this game? That's what I need to know. And I need to know that within the first, not even 5 minutes, I need to know that within the first like 5 seconds. If you can tell me that in the first 5 seconds, you've got me, right? You don't have to tell me everything. We have 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes to ask questions and give answers. But you need to hook me, otherwise it's a wasted meeting, really. Let me see, I have a piece of paper. So I have a do and don't list. I'll send this to you later, and you can hand this out, let everybody have this. So I have a pitch sheet here that I don't use this because I do it all the time anyways, but it gives you an idea of how to write an elevator pitch, and then what to do and what not to do when you're pitching. So here we go. In game name, you play as a role in a setting, right? So you want to set this picture, set the stage, right? So if we were talking about a movie like, say, Star Wars, we would say, okay, in Star Wars, it's a bunch of space knights who are fighting against an evil empire. Okay, got it, good, that's what we have. And then trying to, a goal in the game. What's the goal of your game? How do we win? I've seen so many people pitch the game and never tell me how you win. I've also seen a lot of people pitch a game and never tell me if it's cooperative or solo or multiplayer or one versus many or what. And it's ridiculous. Like, I like, why wouldn't you tell me this? It's just information I need to know to say whether or not that game fits in my line. And then we need to say, what's the coolest thing about this game? What is the coolest, absolute best thing about this game? So I'm thinking in a game like, well, Kingdom Rush. I'll talk about Kingdom Rush. In a game like Kingdom Rush, if you've seen the Kickstarter for it, it's a polyomino game. You're like moving polyominoes around. That's what you're shooting at out of your towers, is Tetris pieces, basically. And so I would say the best part about Kingdom Rush is when you finally stop that advancing horde by covering up all of the pieces with your Tetris pieces. It's amazing, right? It's such a satisfying feeling because you're doing it as a team. So in that, I would have just told them the core mechanic, that it's, you know, a cooperative game, and that it's, you know, a tower defense model, right? So you can tell a lot about your game in very little time. And then you want to talk about the feelings, right? So as an experience designer, as a user experience person, you want to think about what's the feeling, what's the emotionality of this, right? So in my statement, I just said you feel satisfaction. That's what you're going to feel, is satisfied when you put those puzzle pieces in a way that meets the rules of the game. That's the whole idea, right? Whereas in some other games, it might be, and you feel like clever when you aren't found out, when you are successfully the traitor in a game like, say, Coup or something where it's a hidden role game. So name the game, tell us where we are, who are we in this game, what are we doing, how do we win, right? What's the coolest thing about the game? And then what's the feeling that the game gives you? You should be able to do that in 30 seconds. That's called an elevator pitch. It's literally what happens when you get in an elevator at a hotel with somebody. You go, oh, hey, you're the publisher for Pandemic. You're with Z-Man, aren't you? Oh, do you have 30 seconds? And they'll say, well, I have until the elevator gets to my floor. And then you start the pitch. Boom, right there. Hey, I've got a game for you. It's about this, this, this. This is the hook, and here's how you feel. 30 seconds later, the guy will go, okay, let's set up a meeting. Or he'll say, no, that doesn't sound like a game for me. But you know what you didn't do? Waste his time. So that is, by the way, wasting time is the cardinal sin in game design, in all aspects of game design, to be completely honest. You don't want to waste people's time, especially publishers, because publishers are busy people. And the thing about conventions, which is very different than now, conventions are really not for pitching. They happen to coincide with a lot of pitching, but really what conventions are for is for selling. They're to sell games to customers. And if a publisher could have sold 2 games in the time that they spent with you, and you kind of wasted their time, they would have rather been selling those 2 games, and you just cost them, income. So you have to be very mindful of people's time, which is why you lead with your best product and you don't show them the stuff you don't think they'll be interested until later, right? If you have time, show it. If you don't, no big deal. If you only showed 1 game, perfect. As long as you got your foot in the door, that's what you're looking for. A pitch isn't a pitch for now. A pitch is a pitch for a future relationship, right? Like I can still think about people that I pitched to 15 years ago that I still have day-to-day communication with because that pitch was so strong. Whether or not they have my game doesn't matter. Like, so people who are in the pitch project, like Ruben and Pepe, Tanya, who's with Hasbro, I pitched to her first, like maybe 9 or 10 years ago when she was with a totally different company. And she's never signed one of my games, but we're super good friends and we talk all the time. I went to visit her when she went to Hasbro. I went down to Rhode Island, which is where Hasbro is, and spent, a couple days with her. We're friends, like we've been friends forever. And she'll always listen to my pitches, whether or not they're good for a company or not. because she values what I bring to the table. And that's the type of relationship you want to have. And you only do that if you don't waste time. Having a good product is like the second thing, right? But if you don't waste time, at least they're going to be willing to listen to your next product and your next product and your next product, right? Okay, so here's some do's and don'ts. Do give the publisher the context of the game. So, who are they? What are they doing in the game? Very important. Do tell them how to win the game and how to play the game, but be brief. So I saw this really good thing that somebody did on a pitch, on a sell sheet the other day. They used like just an arrow, like a big thick arrow from top to bottom, and then they wrote out the steps. They didn't have to number them or anything. You just intuitively know that, oh, we're going down the arrow. So that must be the start and that must be the finish. Boop. It was brilliant. Although I do like numbers. Numbers are great. So bullet points, numbers, avoid walls of text on your sell sheet, very important. Leave people wanting more. So as a professor, especially as a professor of psychology, I'm very interested in what's called inquiry. And inquiry is asking questions. And if you follow any of the forums that I administrate, like the card and board game designer, tabletop designers guild or whatever, I often answer questions with more questions. And I do that because that's how I've learned how to work as a therapist and as a professor, that I would rather a person find their own solution than me tell them the answer, right? And so I always want to leave publishers wanting more. I want them to ask questions. That's what I really want to do. But I don't want them to feel like I haven't given them anything. I want to give them like 50, 60, 70%, and then they have to engage with me for the other 30%, right? I want to establish that back and forth rapport, right? I want to develop a rapport with them where we're having a conversation rather than just me one-sided selling them things. Nobody likes to feel like they're sold to, even a publisher, right? Even though this is a pitch, people want to feel like they're involved. People want to feel like they've discovered something. People want to feel like they've figured out something, like an idea pops in their head. They go, oh, this is like, oh, so here's a story. This is actually a game that I did pitch to Tanya. And I don't often do this. So I don't like using comparators. Like I won't say, this is like X plus Y, or this game is better than Z. I don't say that often, but sometimes I do. And so I said to Tanya once, it's Scrabble plus Sushi Go. And she's like, oh, that sounds great. So a spelling game where you're drafting cards. It's like, yeah, you've got it. But normally I work in reverse. So normally if I'm teaching somebody a game that I'm pitching, I say, okay, and first you do this and then you do this. And hopefully they'll say something. I hope, I cross my fingers, and I hope they're going to say, oh, it's like Dominion, but with area control. You're like, yes, you've got it. That's exactly what we were going for. And when I say that to them, you should see their eyes light up. They're like, I got it. I am smart, right? So you want to elicit feelings in people. And this is coming completely from my therapy and psychology background. Like I play, like my living is made playing mind games, right, with people, not in a negative way. It's literally trying to help people work through mental illnesses and things like that. So, but what I'm doing in game design and pitching is like, I want you to feel a certain way when I'm pitching to you. I want you to feel that we're having a conversation, a two-way communication. That's not just one way, me just filling you with information. I want you to feel clever, that you found something and discovered something, because that is actually one of the biggest hooks for many publishers, right? It's that they found the game that nobody else found, that they got the pitch first and said yes to it before any other publisher did. Or they found that diamond in the rough, they found that piece of coal, and they were the ones that developed it into this wonderful product that sold millions upon millions of copies. That's what publishers want to do in a lot of ways, right? They want to be the one to have discovered that game. If they wanted to be the one to make the game, they would have been a designer, not a publisher. They want to actually discover and make something out of something else. That's what they're in it for, in a lot of ways. So leave them wanting more. Help them ask questions. Ask them, do you have any questions? Right? You don't have to answer everything in your pitch. Your pitch, your sell sheet do not have to be completely comprehensive, but I need to know something. I need to know, okay, how does this game run, right? How do you win? How many players are there? What's the best part of it? That's what I want to know from your pitch. But after that, it's like, okay, I should be intrigued enough to ask you questions like, okay. So about the combat, I see here that you roll several dice and this, how does that work? Tell me about that. I want people to be interested in my game, right? That's what I want. So you have to create that atmosphere of interesting, which is that allure, which is telling them almost everything, but not exactly everything. It's like that air of, a little bit of an air of mystery is helpful. And it might be purposeful. You might actually build that in. When you're pitching, especially if you're pitching in a language that you're not competent in or you're not comfortable in, practice your pitch, right? Write it out, but practice saying it more than writing it. Like, nobody wants to get a pitch read to them. I want you to pitch to me. I want you to look in my eyes, talk to me like I'm a human being, tell me about this game, and practice it. And it's very different than reading. Like, if you write it out in perfect English and then read it, it's going to sound weird because we actually don't talk like we write, whether in English or Spanish or anything. It's just not the way humans work. We write actually quite differently than we speak, which is why when we do transcriptions, like on like a medical transcription or something, it's hard because it doesn't actually come out like somebody would write it. It comes out like somebody would speak it. And so you want to practice that. I actually videotape them sometimes just to see what do I sound like. And you'll find out that you sound really stupid a lot of times. Like, it's kind of bad. Like, you're talking and like, why did I say that? Why do I phrase it that way when it's much easier to phrase it a natural way? And the thing about this is actually a little pro tip, is that if you do that and you record yourself explaining your games to people, you'll actually have just written your rules. You could take that transcription and then, oh yeah, that's actually how I would write the rules. And I've actually found that I've written rules, and then when I teach it, I've changed my written rules because of how I teach, because it's just more natural and easy to teach it this way or say it this way. Why did I write it that way? That's really awkward. It might be mechanically precise, but it's not necessarily digestible by human brains that way. So you sound like your dad when you record your own voice. Carlos is saying, yeah, no, I get that. I don't like the sound of my voice either. Even though I teach for like 6 hours a day, I think, sitting on my chair. My butt hurts all the time. I talk for 6 hours into my camera. My students are on the other end. But I still don't like the sound of my voice when I hear it. It's unnatural, right? You never sound like you think you sound. When you are talking and when you're doing your pitch, especially your 30-second pitch, you need to get it down to 30 seconds. Like, you refine it and refine it and refine it until it's down to 30 seconds. Figure out, okay, when I'm pitching to somebody, what are the key elements? What do they need to absolutely know to then start getting engaged in a conversation? Say, oh, that sounds super interesting. Let's go. Use a mirror, use a friend, use a camera, use your mom, your kids, your dad. You can talk to your dad, see if you actually do sound like them. Rehearse your pitch. That's good. Use your sell sheet. If you have a sell sheet, use it while you're pitching to point out the visual aspects, right? Like, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I know that's a old saying. In English it is anyways. I don't know if you have a similar one, but a picture is worth 1,000 words is a saying, because it's true that if we have a diagram to point to and say, and this and this and this, it's much easier than describing, this is exactly what this card does, and this is what this card does, if they can capture it by looking at it. Remember that whole idea of icons and information being very important. And if you have a sell sheet in front of you, you can do that. I have a story about Jay. Jay was at Comic-Con, not for games. He was just there as a guest, not as a guest at all, just as a attendee, I guess, of Comic-Con, just to go to Comic-Con, because who wouldn't want to go to Comic-Con? It's kind of fun. And he just happened to have his folder of all our sell sheets on him at the time. And he was in the elevator with somebody, and he said, they just started talking about comics and things like that. And the guy said, oh, I work for a game company. And Jay's ears perked up. He said, oh, what kind of games? Oh, board games and stuff like that. And Jay said, oh, I'm a board game designer. Would you like to hear about some of my games? And the guy, his name is John. He'll actually be at the pitch project. He works for Buffalo Games. John said, sure. Oh, what do you got? And Jay reached into his bag. He said, well, let me show you what I've got. He had his sell sheets right there with him. So there's always an opportunity if you can find it, right? And that was literally an elevator pitch. He did it in an elevator. Very funny. So the last point about the do's is do sell the experience. You want to talk about the feelings, what people are going to be doing, but then also what they're going to be feeling while they're doing, right? If we just talk about the doing, that's very mechanical. If we start talking about the feeling, that's very human, right? And games are a human experience, right? There are other animals who do play games, but humans are the ones who do it probably the most and the best. And so we want to sell an experience. We want to really tell people, this is how you'll be feeling. This is what you will be feeling when you do these actions and do these things. It's amazing, right? You want to really upsell that point. And that's really what you're trying to pitch. So many pitches are just about the mechanics or the theme that they lose the experience. And this is how I view it. I actually view experience as paramount, as like the roof of a house, right? This is the most important thing, is the roof of the house. Why? Because it keeps all the rain and snow and stuff in Canada, definitely snow, from falling on you, right? But it's only good if it's supported by the walls. The walls are like your theme and your mechanics, right? And those walls are connected to each other by two other walls, so they're communicating with each other. So theme and mechanics inform each other. They have to. Otherwise, they're going to be what we call dissonant. They're not going to feel right together, right? So if you're making, say, a racing game about dodos, I don't know who would make a game about that, but let's say you did. Let's say you made a really weird game is about racing on dodos. So you make sure that that theme lines up to the mechanics. If the mechanics are like slow and really plodding and methodical, that doesn't feel like I'm racing on anything. Why would I do that, right? So you want the game to feel maybe fast or fluid, but maybe a little clunky because dodos don't fly, right? And so you have to, and quirky, you have to make sure that they inform each other, because that is what gives you the roof, the experience, right? And anything I find that doesn't hold up the roof, that doesn't support the roof in some way, get rid of it. It's gone. So for example, Belfort, which is one of our first games, I think it's our second game. Belfort was a game about building and just constantly building this big giant castle thing. And we actually had all these other things in the game, like a dragon and orcs, and that would attack this and break it all down. And our playtesters hated them. Even though they were really cool mechanically, the players hated them because what they wanted out of this particular experience was building and building and building, just see who got to build best. And anytime anybody got anything destroyed, they felt super bad, sad face. They felt really, really awful. Like it was so awful that like I guess I just lose then, right? Just because this dragon attacked me once, I guess I'm out of the game. I've lost. And whether or not that was mathematically true, because it wasn't, they felt that way, and it felt so bad that they just wanted to quit right then and there. So we took it out, right? Because that wasn't, the core experience isn't lost. The core experience in Belfort was building efficiently. It's an efficiency engine. And so the roof of efficiency and building was not held up by the dragon. The dragon was like the outhouse, the place where you go poop outside over there. That's what the dragon was. And so we got rid of it because it stunk, right? Now that people have played more Belfort, after 10 years of it existing or so, maybe we might say, oh, here's an expansion with the dragon. But the core experience was never that. And so we learned really fast to listen to our playtesters, right? Listen to that feedback and sell the experience and build the game to purposely aim always towards the experience and not detract from it at all. So the more things that you have that detract from the experience, the more bloated your game probably is. And also the more dissonant people will feel, like they go, this doesn't make sense, right? There's no, we call it affordance in psychology, an affordance, where something tells you to do something, right? And Lewis is like, yes, that's also probably a UX thing, right? where if a button looks like I should push it, I should probably push it, right? Or it's probably something that you click on rather than drag, right? If it's a button, why am I dragging a button? I should click on it, right? The same thing in game design. We have all these affordances. We have all these ideas that, you know, dice should be rolled. Of course, that's functional fixedness. That's another psychological term where we assume that's only that's all that it does. And so when games come along, you go, oh no, you actually build that die, or you don't roll it, you place it. That breaks that functional fixedness, and it's used in interesting ways, and that's cool. But we can still use those hooks, those affordances to lead to better game design and to really make the experience better in the end, because it teaches in a stealthy manner. It teaches without having to teach. Again, from Belfort, just an idea of an affordance is elves and dwarves. Nobody ever put the dwarves in the forest. Why? Because dwarves don't work in the forest. Dwarves work in the mines. So that's where the dwarves go, right? It's just these types of logical affordances that are given to us by the thematics that lead into the thematics that lead into the mechanics that hold up the experience. Okay, so that's kind of what the idea of experience and selling an experience is all about. Is don't worry so much about the theme, don't worry so much about the mechanics, sell that experience. The only reason why you'd ever worry about the theme and mechanics is if they didn't hold up the experience. And the thing, and I guess I'm saying this a little bit weird, because this is how I design, right? I design towards experience. So I make sure that my theme and mechanics always hold up this. But if they don't, then you do have to explain those mechanics, because if I'm looking at your game and I'm going, why are these things doing this? Something's wrong, and you need to explain that. So definitely have seen some games over my lifespan where there's some weird stuff happening and they don't explain it, which makes it even worse. So if you have something that is like a sore thumb, like it's like, this kind of sticks out, it's not really in the experience, but it makes the game work, you do need to explain that piece in your sell sheet, in your pitch. Otherwise, the person's going to go, I don't understand this. Why is this even here? See, things to not do in your pitch, as much as you'd like to, don't explain your artistic intent. This is hard for creatives to do, especially if it's like a role-playing game or a game where you've spent hours developing this lore that backs your game up. Nobody wants to know about that. Not at a pitch. They will gladly hear that later, and they will develop it with you later. They'll get, yeah, we'll get into that. We'll have really cool art with all your characters on it. Great, we'll do that later. But right now, I need to know what's the experience and how does the theme and the mechanics talk to each other to hold that up. That's what I need to know. So I'm not saying don't explain your themes and mechanics, but sell the experience first. And artistic intent doesn't do that. So artistic intent is stuff like, talking about yourself, talking about, why you are the best person to make this game. That's not super interesting in a big, long spiel. Like if I said, this is a game about communication, and I don't know if you knew this, but I'm a professor in communication sciences, and that's why I decided to make that game. That's fine. Like a couple, like blurb, like 3 seconds about that. Like, Pepe might have said, oh, this is a game about dodo racing, and I am the best person to talk about this because I am a certified dodo breeder. I raise them from birth, from the egg to the big dodo that you ride on. 5 seconds, fine, talk about that. I actually don't think that's what he does. I don't think that's what he does at all. But you don't want to explain the detail of the world too much, right? We can get to that later. The elevator pitch is not meant to tell everything about something. It's actually really meant to hook somebody and to get them to ask questions. So if you said, yeah, Belfort is set in a world where there's elves and dwarves and blah, 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 blah. That's all you really need to know about Belfort. That's set in a world with elves and dwarves. We're building a castle, and here's how we build the castle. The experience that you're going to get is that you've been such an efficient master architect that you have won the king's favor, blah, done. And then the publisher might say, oh, elves and dwarves, okay. Well, that's kind of, traditional and boring. What about your world is interesting? Thank you for asking. Now you've got the permission to talk, right? So Now you can talk about your lore. Now you can talk about your world. Try not to, like I said, not to use other games to describe your game unless it makes really good sense. Like when I said, oh, it's Scrabble and, you know, Sushi Go smashed together. That's okay if the person knows Scrabble and Sushi Go and likes Scrabble and Sushi Go. If they don't like either or they don't know the game, you didn't help them at all, right? So I've actually had people pitch games and, you know, they say it's like game A plus game B. And the person who's listening to the pitch said, well, I hate game A, so no. But you didn't give me a chance. Well, you said it's like that game and I hate that game. So I'm not even gonna, I don't want to hear the pitch. You're just wasting my time. Right, so don't shoot yourself in the foot. Try to give your game a chance by maybe letting it stand on its own merits, right? If they find out and they say, oh, that's just like this plus this, then that's fine. Let them do that. Now, one thing that does work is when you say something like A plus B, but something else. That can be useful and effective. It's used often in like pitching movies. Like imagine Star Wars plus Clerks, but set in medieval times. And now you're like, oh, what could that be? For games, you can kind of do that. Like, okay, imagine Gloomhaven plus code words, but you have to roll a lot of dice. And like, what is that? That might make you ask questions, right? Rather than start to hate on it. It's that but, that twist, that's really, really important if you're going to do that. I don't recommend doing it. Like, I don't do it, but other people have, and it's been effective. So I'm not recommending it either. I'm just saying that's a tool. You can use it if it becomes effective for you. But definitely the but is the important part. That twist is what gets people questioning it, right? When you just tell them it's Scrabble plus this, in their mind, again, this is what we call functional fixedness in psychology. That's all it is. It is this plus this. Boom, done, good. You told me the game. I hate that. We don't need to talk anymore, right? But if you say, but, now you've opened up their world to possibilities. And I go, oh, okay. And the other thing is that psychologically, when we say the word but, we tend to, in our minds, erase everything that was said before the but, right? We keep it in mind, but it's like, oh, it must not be exactly like that. So even though I hate game A and dislike game B, it's not like that at all. It's different because they've told me it's different. So I'm going to listen to the pitch still, right? So again, use psychology in your benefit. Use it against the people or with the people. They're not your enemy, but you can use it to sell, right? Psychology is a very, very powerful tool. The last thing, two last things is industry jargon and buzzwords. Okay, and this is going to be hard because when we're translating, say, from Spanish into English, that might be the only word you know that it is an industry buzzword, a piece of jargon. And so I highly suggest that you run it by people who are native speakers of the language, that might be in the industry, because industry jargon, to me, as a publisher or designer, just says that you know that word, but you might not know what it means. And I've actually seen that. I actually saw that yesterday. Somebody on a sell sheet put cooperative and one versus many on the same sell sheet, which are actually diametrically opposed things. You can't have a cooperative game and it be one versus many, right? Because cooperative means all players play together towards an end goal. One versus many means one person being like the mastermind and the other players fighting against that one player. And so you can't be both cooperative and one versus many at the same time. So that shows a person who knows the jargon, but maybe doesn't know what it means, right? To the wider audience of publishing and game design. So just be aware of that jargon and buzzwords won't get you anywhere if you can't back it up, if you can't explain what it means. And in talking about explaining, try to do this less. So explaining how your mechanisms work is okay, but it's more important to explain how your mechanisms are going to make the player feel. That's much more important in the short pitch. In the long pitch, like in the expanded version of it all, like the 15 minutes after you've got somebody's attention, that's when you can explain, okay, so we roll dice, you sum them up, you use that to That's how much money you have this turn, and use those dollars to buy you these cards from over here. That's fine. But in the 30-second pitch, it's like, hey, you're gonna roll money, you're gonna roll dice and get money, and you use that money to build your empire. It feels awesome when you do it because you have this like 6-10 cards in front of you, and you're using them to do all this amazing stuff. It feels awesome, right? We want to sell a feeling rather than the mechanical nature of this is to do this and then do this. You sound like you're a robot, and we don't want the robot yet. The rules stuff can come later in that pitch that comes after the fact. Okay. Other things. So I know that some of you have been in the pitch project, but I'll just tell you a little bit about what we're doing with the pitch project again. So we are basically we have 746 games that have been submitted to the pitch project, which is amazing. Thank you, everybody who did that. That's wonderful. And now I have to judge all of them. So I have to go through all these pitches and see which pitches go on to be shown to the publishers. And this is important for the publishers because the publishers don't want to see 756 pitches at all. They really, really don't. They want to see the cream of the crop. And so that's what the judging is for, is to say which of these sell sheets best communicates the game to the publisher, so the publisher can make a decision whether or not they want to sign this game. And so the people who have the best sell sheets are going to be given the opportunity to live pitch over live stream to over 40 publishers at once, ranging from the biggest publishers in the world. Hasbro and Spin Master are two of the, Hasbro is the biggest, Spin Master's like second or third. Publishers in the world of games and toys, like literally these are like billion-dollar companies, right? All the way to small publishers that maybe have 1 or 2 games in their line. And then somewhere in the middle, there's publishers who have made like millions of dollars on Kickstarter, but are still small companies. So companies like Joking Hazard, which is based on like a web comic type thing. Like they did, the trolley experiment game. And that's the only game they have, and they'd like more because they did so well with that. So the pitch project also divides games into 3 different categories: party, family, kids, and then the third one is strategy. And so what I've done, and Jay have done, is we've interviewed most of the higher level publishers and got their ideas about what games fit in these categories. And so I've broken that all down in like massive spreadsheets for people. See, this is how you should compare to see where your game fits if you don't know. We've interviewed all the publishers and showed video about what they like, what they don't like, what they're looking for, how to pitch to them, what floats their boat, what really makes them think negatively about a pitch. We've asked them all that. So there's a lot of information. The pitch sheets are being judged not only by Jay and myself, but by tons of other established designers to see, who's going on to the next level of pitching. And the thing about it is that I think a lot of people, whether or not they win that coveted spot of pitching, a lot of people have got a lot out of it just by having a deadline. Having a deadline is really important to say, okay, Gen Con, I'll have my sell sheets ready. There's no Gen Con, so a lot of people didn't. So we said pitch project. October 2nd, get your stuff in. And then the other thing is that a lot of people have never known what a pitch sheet was, like a sell sheet was. And it's funny because we've always used them because I think we invented them. And when I say invented them, I don't really mean we were the first ones to ever use a sell sheet at all in the world, but I believe we were the first designers to ever use a sell sheet to pitch games to publishers. They've been using sell sheets all the time when they sell their games to distributors and the distributors sell them to stores. There's always sell sheets involved. But I think we were the actual first designers to make sell sheets and give a one sheet layout done like a sell sheet to publishers. And that just comes from Jay's experience in retail. He works for Best Buy. And then I said, why don't we do that? Because I saw a bunch of them sitting on his table for like a Sony television because he had them home from work. I said, how come we don't do that for games? He goes, well, maybe we should. And so we did. And that's how we became successful. And I mean, that's actually legitimately quite literally why why we were thought of as professional, because we came prepared with sell sheets, with our prototypes, with business cards, with all these things. We had them all ready. And so publishers like, whoa, this is different. I'm used to like, they were used to designers being kind of these quirky, weird people who, showed up at game conventions with a box of parts. And we were like confident salesmen, and it was very different for them. So they quite liked the professionalism of that. Okay, so let's talk about sell sheet design, because that's what the pitch project is kind of about. So sell sheets, pitching to a publisher. So title's important. Make a title for your game. What you should try to do with the title is make sure that A, it's unoffensive. That's a good thing. But B, that it's searchable, right? So SEO actually matters. So if you're using a term that is really easy to find, that can be better. That could be a good thing for you, rather than a term that is very, very common. Now, if you have a tagline behind that, that might make it easier to find, might differentiate it from other games of the same or similar names. But look on BGG for sure, and then try Googling the game's name. Like, I bet you, if you looked at most of the games that are games about places, you'd find the place first on Google before you'd find the game, right? So place names are very common, but they're as game titles, but they're not really strong for searchables, except within the game world if you are the only game that has that title. So Akrotiri for us is a game that is named after a place. It is the only game named Akrotiri, so that's fine. But if you search for it on like Google, you'll find all the ancient ruins in Greece that we're talking about first. Now you put Akrotiri game, you'll only find ours. So that's one thing that's good about it. For demographics, you need to put your demographics on the sell sheet. So things like player count, the game time, recommended age range, and just some notes on all of those. Player count, a lot of people will spike their player count. So they'll like say, yeah, I can play solo to 6. Because the larger the player count, really the more the marketplace is for that game, right? But you actually really have to be able to play those player counts, and it has to be good, right? So don't tack on a solo mode just to say it has a solo mode, although that is what every publisher wants right now, of course, because we're like this in lockdown for a lot of us. Don't just say solo because you has a mode where you can play the solo. It should still be good, right? And don't inflate player counts if it can't support it well, or if the game ends up being like 3 times as long, or if you need twice as many components. Remember that your component list, speaking of component list, the publisher looks at that to price out the game to see is this feasible. Because I've seen, again, I've been looking at hundreds and hundreds of sell sheets, and some of them come in, I said, well, how is anybody going to make that? That's way too expensive to make. So you want to give publishers a good game that has a great margin, right? If you understand how board game economics works. Does anybody know? I mean, I'm sure people who publish know how much, like a $50 game, how much does a $50 game, or should a $50 game cost you to make and get to your warehouse? Does anybody know? If it's a $50 game in the store, how much do you think it should cost? $8. I'd say less. Well, yeah, but eight is like the most it should cost, right? If you're using like a 5-time factor. So it could cost 10 at the real offset. 8 is that's when you're getting a decent margin. But if you could get it for less, then you're doing better. So really anywhere, obviously margins, the lower the better. But 8 would be great, because then you're looking at like a 6-7 times ratio, which is where you're actually going to start making money. At a 5-time ratio, you're making money. It's just not a lot. So conservative math says $10 would be the landed cost. Landed cost meaning that you have it shipped to your fulfillment center or distribution center or something like that. So your manufacturing cost has to be less than that, right, to get it to that $10 landed cost. Other things, that you need to do here. Oh, for age range, when you're pitching your age range, that is very different than what the publisher is going to put on for their age range. So the publisher might put on something like 14 plus. You're going, but my game can be played by 8-year-olds. And the reason why a lot of publishers do that is to avoid having to test their games for children in terms of safety. Most publishers that we talk to, it's like, you should probably do that anyway. You should probably test anyway, just to ensure that it is safe. But the age, so you might put down an age of like 8. But if your game can be played by 8-year-olds, or you think it can be played by 8-year-olds, make sure you've tested it with 8-year-olds, right? Several times to make sure that they can play the game. There's several things that kids just can't do physically, mentally, cognitively, and emotionally. Kids are kids. They're not little adults, right? So you have to just be aware of that. Again, for your flavor and overview on your sell sheet, keep it short and sweet. I've seen sell sheets that half of it is, lore and world building, and they don't spend any time on explaining how the actual game works, and that's like a fail, right? Again, that component list, itemize it, keep similar items together so that I can quickly go through and say, okay, this is going to be a $4 manufactured cost, so probably about $5, $6 landed. So it's an MSRP of about $30 MSRP. Perfect. That's a game we want, right? If you said, I have 12 cards in this deck and 36 cards in this deck and 14 cards in this deck and 11 cards in that deck, just tell me that you have 63 cards or whatever that added up to. I didn't do the math because I don't need to know the individual little decks. I need to know the total number so that I can evaluate it quickly, right? My job as the publisher is to quickly evaluate that, figure out what the landed cost is going to be for it, multiply that by 5, 6, 7 to see, does that fit within a price point that I think I can sell that box for, right? That experience in a box. Is it worth $35? Is it worth $40? If it's not, I'm not signing it no matter what. If it is, then I will look at it. If I look at it and I say, oh, I can see how we can reduce that in cost, then I still might do it, right? So that component list is important. Contact info. Oh, contact info. Please, please, please put that on your stuff. Not when you're submitting to the pitch project, because it's a little different there. But when you have a publisher, make sure they have every single way to contact you, as long as you are willing to accept that contact, right? So if you give them a phone number, but you never pick up your phone, don't give them your phone number, right? Email is definitely the best. If you have a weird email from like your youthful days, that is like hot dad 53, don't use that. Don't use hot dad 53. It's funny because as a professor, we only allow our students to use the college email, but sometimes they'll email us from their outside email. And I don't really want to know that you're drunk mom of 55. I really don't want to know that, especially my students. And so publishers don't want to know that about you either. So just start a Gmail account that is like your name, right? Or if you are fancy and have a website of your own, just attach an email to that. It's like, Pepe@awesomegamedesigner.com. Perfect. That's great. Do that. In-game photos. So we use photos a lot. And a lot of people say, well, can't I use my screenshot from Tabletop Simulator? And I mean, sure you can. But part of the reason actually why I like seeing physical prototypes on a thing is because I know you've actually made it, which means you've tested it, which means that people have played it, which means that you know the ergonomics of it all. So this is part of the weird thing about testing in virtual space. So testing in virtual space is actually a lie. It's a literal lie. And so I don't like it a lot. I value it as far as I can throw it, which is not super far. So the problem with, awesome3000@magnifique.com. Perfect. There you go. The problem with virtual testing is two major things, and probably even more. For me as a tester, I can't watch your body language, which I value intensely. So being a trained therapist and psychology dude, I like watching people react. And if I can't watch your reactions, I'm not getting a lot out of the play test other than mechanics. And I actually don't play test games until mechanically they're super sound. So What am I doing it for? The other thing is that time is multiplied in Tabletop Simulator by at least a factor of 1.5. So any game that you play in Tabletop Simulator, you have to take off the teach time and then divide it, by 3 and multiply it by 2 to get the actual time that it probably is more likely to be, because everybody is clumsy in Tabletop Simulator. No matter how much you play in it, you're just not going to be as fluid with it. The other thing about Tabletop Simulator that I dislike is that, okay, so in games where there's automation, so some people automate stuff. The problem with automation in Tabletop Simulator is that we can't automate in the game, in the real game, the cardboard box game. You can't automate. So how do I know that my rules for setup and procedural stuff like tracking stuff between turns actually works? I don't, because I automated it. I don't know if you could do it as a human being, right? So that interpretation of the written word, again, is super important. And so that's one thing that actually gets lost in that equation. And the other thing that gets lost in the equation is things like the physicality of the game. So not only from an ergonomic standpoint, so in Tabletop Simulator, you could have 15 cards up in front of you and play perfectly fine. But how many of us could hold 15 cards in our hands and still roll dice and move pawns and all that kind of stuff? It's hard, right? I mean, we get to fold them up, put them down, but then we can't see them. So we have to understand that the physicality of a virtual game is entirely different than a real game. Not only the physical mechanics, but can I hold that many cards? Can I, roll that many dice at once? Can I, do any of this stuff? The other physical thing is that on a tabletop, like a real literal tabletop between me and you, I can read your cards. Like I can see what you play on the table. In Tabletop Simulator, I can't do that as easily. I have to scroll over it, use the Alt key to magnify it. And it doesn't give you a really good sense of, is your graphic design solid, right? Is your text too small? And then the final thing about Tabletop Simulator that's a lie is that in Tabletop Simulator, you can have unlimited anything because it's virtual. And so some designers, when they design in Tabletop Simulator, like, oh yeah, we'll put 600 chips in there. And they write on their sell sheet, 600 chips. It's like, there's no way anybody's going to publish a game that has 600 chips in it. So you might want to actually cut that down and figure out what is the limit? What is the number of chips that you actually need, instead of this virtual, anything you want, your wish is my command, right? We're not genies. We can't do that as publishers. So that's my rant against Tabletop Simulator. That said, I do, recognize that it is something that is very, very necessary in these times, right? So other things. The in-game photo and teaching diagram and teaching text use numbers or letters, like annotate your diagrams. Don't just show me a picture and say, this is a picture of a card. Annotate it. Tell me what does this mean? What does this mean? Where does it fit in the flow of your game? Step 1, step 2, step 3. First we deal out 3 cards. Second, we roll 2 dice. Third, we use the numbers on the dice to pay for the cards. Fourth, we score points. Tell me all of that in your sell sheet, right? Tell me all of that in your sell sheet. It's not in your elevator pitch, but it should be on your sell sheet, and it should be in your actual pitch to me. I need to know how the game plays. If I don't know how the game plays, I can't make a decision whether or not it should be signed or not, or move on. And again, you want to sell the experience of what it's really going to be, what it's really going to look like. So having a lot of people will take a picture of their game spread with all the cards laid out nicely in this nice fan with, the exact colored pieces and the exact colored places, and it looks pretty, but it's not really real life. It's not really an example of what really happens in game. I actually want to know what happens in the game. So actually, how I use sell sheets when I'm pitching to somebody, I'll actually point to the pictures in the sell sheet. I'll say blah, blah, blah. This is what happens first, that happens second, and that happens third. And even here, I'm annotating my sell sheet about sell sheets. It's like, okay, first this happens, then you need to do this, then go to here, and then that happens. And that's how the game's played. And they can follow my finger. They can see me talking about this stuff. They can look at the pictures. Oh, I get it from the picture. Yeah. That makes sense. And so when they take the sheet home with them, they'll say, oh, I remember Sen taught me how to play this game just by pointing to the sheet of paper. And if you can do that, you can teach anything, right? And the text, you need to actually explain what's happening in the picture. I have so many sell sheets 756 of them, 46 of them, well, that's not all of them, but a lot of them just have a picture and they don't explain it at all. They expect me to get something out of this picture without them telling me, right? So yes, I know I said don't tell everything, but at least explain something so I have some sense of what's going on. I don't want to see a box shot. I don't want to see the table spread where all the cards are nice. I want to see the game in action because that's what we're paying for. We're not paying for a nice spreadsheet of things. We're paying for, what does this game play like? What does it feel like? What does it look like? What's the experience? That's what I need to know. You'll hear a lot about this in the future, and we'll do something in the future on the pitch project. I think about sizzle videos. So sizzle videos are like literally 90 seconds, maybe a little bit more. And they say, what is this product? What's cool about it? And how does it work? That's it. That's a sizzle video, right? It's really fast. It's just a blast of information. It doesn't have tons of information on it about the actual mechanisms and anything like that. It's just basically, here's how it does this thing. It's awesome. Look at this. It works much better for toys and much better for party games, but sizzle videos can still be something that we use as game designers to get our point across in a slightly different way, especially things that have maybe moving parts that excuse me, aren't easy to explain in text. So do use all the tools that you have. With the pitch project, we're not allowing video, just to keep things simple for the first time around, and also to kind of lower the bar for entry. We didn't want to stop people who didn't have access to like a good camera or whatever from joining the project. All right, so let's see. I think I've talked a lot about pitching. I've talked a lot about collaboration and the pros and cons. What else is there? What else is there that you want to know? So that's been 90 minutes. 90 minutes of me just jibber jabbering at you. Can we open the floor for questions? Would that be good? Perfect. Okay, good. So if anybody has a question, if you type it in the chat, or if you, I'll open the chat. I haven't actually opened the chat yet, so I might not have seen your questions. But if you have a question, you can put it in the chat. I don't think we have Q&A in here. No, we don't. Or if you want to ask by voice, that's fine too. Oh yeah, so Carlos is asking what kind of psychology I'm into. So actually, yeah, I teach development psychology, behavioral psychology, and communication sciences. So those are my 3 areas of study. So I'm a pediatric therapist for children who have communication disorders. And the communication disorders often lead to behavioral problems. So that's my lens, my theoretical lens. So I use a lot of like Vygotsky, Csikszentmihalyi in terms of theories. Piaget, of course. So early learning, teaching, ed psych type stuff. That's what I'm into. Yeah, so my show is called Meeple Syrup, and it's just on Facebook. So if you look for that on Facebook, it's the only one you'll find it. Yes, rolling dice is boring in TTS. You're completely right. Okay, so how can you get to work to design games for brands such as Hasbro? Yeah, Chomsky is great too, by the way, for like language development and stuff like that. So Hasbro is super specific. Hasbro, and they've just changed. So you are actually on the cutting edge of Hasbroism. Hasbro just recently had a change in management in the games division. And so last year, I would have told you something completely different. Last year, I said, Hasbro wants viral games. And I would have said, Hasbro wants games where they teach themselves and you want to take a viral video or make a video of it and post it online with nobody telling you to do that because it's just so fun to see. And you know how to play it just by looking at it. And that's what Hasbro 2019 wanted. Hasbro 2020 wants something a little more traditional now. They're getting kind of out of the viral games and out of the like poop games. They used to have a lot of games about poop for some reason. But they're actually trying to look at reviving some of their older lines. So Hasbro, if you don't know, owns Wizards of the Coast, which owns Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. They also own Avalon Hill. And Avalon Hill were games like Betrayal at the House on the Hill. All sorts of other like classic games were by Avalon Hill. And so Hasbro itself makes other games like they did Hero Escape actually, which was strange back in the days when Rob Davio worked there. But they obviously do Monopoly and things like that, and Battleship and whatnot. So they have a wide range of things they could possibly do. But Hasbro itself is looking more at, family strategy games now. So games that you can enjoy with the family that play, maybe in 30 to 60 minutes. Sweet spot is 30 to 45 at a MSRP, probably around $30 to $40. So your manufacturing cost would be, again, 1/5 of that at the most. And less than that is the better. And for Hasbro, they print in volume of so a regular publisher, like a regular hobby publisher, even one that you might think that's big, like, I don't know, let's think. Renegade is actually pretty big, so they're a little different. But so let's say Z-Man. Unless your game is Pandemic, you're probably only getting maybe 10,000 copies made of that game. Hasbro is printing in volumes of 50,000 in a single print run. Why? Because Hasbro games go everywhere around the world all the time in multiple. That's a per language print run. So every print run, every language is printing that many. So you're looking at a hefty paycheck. They will actually pay you to evaluate your game at a certain point. They'll take it and look at it, and then if it makes it past that, they'll say, okay, you can't show this to anybody. Here's $5,000 to not show it to anybody ever again, until we sign it or don't. Then once it gets back to you, if they don't sign it, you've made $5,000 or whatever, and they will let you show it to other people. But yeah, Tanya is the inventor relations person for Hasbro US, and she will be a part of the pitch project. She's more than happy to answer questions for you on the pitch project if you're part of it. But yeah, working for Hasbro means coming up with something that they will sell. They have, because they are a publicly traded company, they are beholden to shareholders, and the shareholders decide what is kind of what their avenue is in a way, right? So you have to make a relationship first with them, which is important, like I said, and then pitch them games that are Hasbro games. And I think, Ruben and Pepe, because they are in the pitch project, if they watch the video, I'm more than happy with you, translating that back to this group without actually sharing the video, because you can't, but you can definitely transcribe it and tell them this is what Hasbro's looking for. That's fine. Since I'm a psychologist, what are the disciplines you look for in your partners? Oh yeah, so that's a good point. And I didn't mention this at all, but when you are collaborating with people, look for complementary sets of skills, and more importantly, I think, is personalities. So I'm the person that thinks about everything in their head and designs it all in my head, which is bad. Don't do that. Whereas Jay and Jesse are people who have to have the physical thing in front of them to know that it works or not. I just decide it works in my head and think that I'm awesome and perfect, so it does, but it really doesn't. That's the bad thing about it, right? Whereas Jay and Jesse are the people who no, we're making it now. I made it already. I'm like, oh, I wasn't done thinking about it. Nope, sorry, I made it. And yes, that works. No, this doesn't. And yes, this works. So the sooner you can get your game onto the table, the better you are. And we call this the MVP, the minimum viable product. It's a word from a different thing. It's a word from Agile and Scrum. But we use it because it makes sense. A minimum viable prototype. What's the smallest game I can make that will still allow me to play the game, play that, we call it a core play loop. So a loop that goes over and over game for a few turns with a couple players. That's all I look for. And so usually it's about 24 cards, 30 cards maybe, right? For a game, a couple tiles, some dice. Instead of the 600 cards and 20 chips and board and all that kind of stuff. You don't need that to see whether your proof of concept works. So that's the type of thing I look for, is more mindset than that. And then I look for skill sets. So I am not a great illustrator. I'm an okay graphic designer, but if somebody's better, that's great. You know, my strengths are in certain areas, and that's what people value. So I'm a really strong writer. I've written a lot of stuff in my time as an academic and whatnot. And then I'm also a strong writer for thematic things. I have like a memory, like a steel trap. So I remember the exact episode that this happened in and stuff like that. So those things. Yes, they do own My Little Pony. My Little Pony, sorry. So, I mean, they are looking for brand extension always. Like all companies that have IP always want brand extensions, which means a game that uses their IP that they didn't have to do anything for, that gets them more money. That is what a lot of companies are looking for. And so if right now though, I don't know if Hasbro itself is making any games with those licenses, or if they're sub-licensing them out, because Renegade just had an announcement that they're doing games for Transformers, My Little Pony, G.I. Joe. I think they're only doing the role-playing games right now, but you never know what that means. Let's see. What do I pick first? Thematic or mechanic to design? Experience. I always pick experience first. So I know some people are nodding, say, yeah, I knew he'd say that. But that is literally what I pick. I used to be mechanics first when I first started. And you can change. It's okay. Changing is good. Change is all right. That I used to design with mechanics first because I would always just think of these cool little things. Like, what if you rolled dice and instead of numbers, they were colors, and the colors correspond, you know, that's great. But in the end, like I said, you have to understand that a game is just a collection of mechanics. And the sum of the parts is greater than that. So a game is also synergistic in that the theme plus mechanics gives you this overall experience. And that's really what you're trying to sell. I'll tell you a funny story where we didn't do that and it failed. So there was a game that we had, which is a card game. It was a card game about juggling, like juggling things. It was called Up in the Air, and it was a good game. It was a partner game, like a partner card game. But we put a theme on it where it's like juggling cats and swords and flaming torches and chainsaws. And so the publisher that saw it said, oh, that looks fun. Let's play that. It looked like a fun, goofy game about juggling. And it wasn't. It's a super strategic, tactical game about using your partner to score points. Because, you know, with the juggling and juggling as a pair, you have to be timed correctly. And so it was like all this really precise play. And within a minute of playing it, it's like, nope, don't want it. And we're like, why? It's a good game. Because it might be a good game. And he actually does like those types of games. This guy, we know him very well. Well, I like those types of games. But, you know, this is not at all what you promised, right? So we sold them a promise of an experience that the game mechanics couldn't deliver. And so I now always think about experience first. What is the experience? What's the feeling that we want to happen? How does the theme and mechanics, again, support that experience? How far should a game be art developed to be shown to a publisher? Currently, I'm using components from other games for the physical prototype. Marlon, that is 100% okay. I am 100% okay with that, and everybody should be okay with that. I don't know how many people in this group are illustrators by trade or graphic designers by trade, but if you're not, you don't have to be. You don't have to be Juan. You could ask Juan Manuel to help you. That'd be fine. He'd probably like that. But you don't have to be him in order to get the job done. There's tons and tons of free resources online. The Noun Project, Flat Icon, GameIcon.net, all sorts of places where you can get free or very low-cost icons, which are actually more important than the illustrations. Illustration-wise, for art development, placeholder is great. So when I show off design, I don't know if I have any. Oh, yeah, I do. So, no, that's not a good one. So, okay, so because I make licensed games, these are some things here. So I made a game for Dragon Ball, and when I pitched it, we just added, like, you know, hey, there's Goku with red hair Goku. That's all we cared about. You know, just enough to give flavor so the publisher knew this is a game about Dragon Ball. And we don't go for full art. We never really do. I actually think it's a waste of time. I think it's a trap. that a lot of novice designers fall into, where they think they're designing the game, but all they're doing is finding art or drawing art. And that's best left to somebody else. Especially if you're pitching, if you are going to self-publish, go right ahead, commission art, do what you want, because you are going to make the money back. But if you are a designer first and not thinking about self-publishing, you won't make that money back. Most publishers will scrap all art and start a game. Why? Because likely they're going to retheme the game or fit it to within what they like or what their line is representing, right? So if you spent like $1,000 getting some artist to do a couple pieces of cards, you just spent a couple $1,000 on owning some art that you may never get to use. So I wouldn't go that far. Placeholder art is usually fine and usually recognized as okay in terms of morality and legality. So if you like grabbed a piece of art from the internet, obviously I don't own the rights to Dragon Ball. I mean, I do have the rights to use Dragon Ball art because we made the game, but before, if we were pitching it as a Dragon Ball game, we wouldn't have the rights to that, obviously, but you know, obviously nobody thinks we do either. So we put that on there, we say placeholder art, and that's decent. That's usually good enough. What are people, Alexis asks, what are publishers most looking for in a 2020 game besides solo mode? This is what they're looking for. A lot of publishers are actually looking for games that you can play online over something like Zoom. So if you could make a game where you are using video conferencing, but it doesn't have to be video conferencing, like if you could play it at the table, great. But if it could also be played over video conferencing, even better. Because we're realizing that as the world gets more and more populated, it's actually smaller and smaller. We actually sometimes have to be further and further apart from each other. So having games like Karuba or Welcome to, where it's, you know, some of roll and move games, roll and write games or flip and write games where everybody's doing an action based on the decision of one thing that we can all see, that's great. Code names can be played online. Lots of games can be played online. So if it's easily portable to an online version that isn't electronic, I don't mean electronic, I mean just one camera looking at the components and everybody else making decisions about that. Like just one, you can do that, things like that. Emmanuel is asking, for first timers, do you recommend to create a small proto batch, something like 20 copies to actually show in events or pitches? Only if you can afford the time. Like literally, we usually just have one copy of everything, or maybe two. Usually two, because Jay and I live apart from each other, so we have our own copies and we just give those away. But the other thing, there's a lot of legalities that you should learn eventually about things like right to first refusal. So right to first refusal is basically saying, like if I had only one prototype, I give it to that one person and I say, you have a right to first refusal, meaning that if somebody else makes an offer on it, I ask you first, can you beat that offer? And if you can, I go with you. If you can't, I'm going with the other person over there. And that even works if you have multiple prototypes. So sometimes we'll send out print and plays. Like in nowadays, we'll send out print and plays to everybody. And I'll say, you know, if somebody wants the right to first refusal, like they say they're really interested in it, I'll give it to them. But you can only give one. You can only give one person right to first refusal. If I was more mercenary about it, I might say, yeah, but you're gonna have to, you know, you're gonna have to have like an evaluation fee of like $100 to have right to first refusal. Some people might do that. I don't recommend it. But yeah, having more copies is always better unless it costs you time and unless you think you're going to be making a lot of changes, right? So it's like a sunk cost. That's the bad thing about doing a lot of art, by the way, and a bad thing about making lots and lots of really nice prototypes is that it's now this thing that we psychologically term a sunk cost, where it's like, I spent hours making that. I spent money doing that art. I can't change it. And so when somebody comes up to you and says, oh, I think you should change this value from 7 to 5, you now have this equation in your head going, how much money would it cost me to change that? How much art do I have to redo to change that? And your brain says, oh, that's too much of a cost. You're not going to do that. We've already sunk our time and effort and money into making it what it is. It's going to stay that way, right? So it's this form of a bias where we have a sunk cost bias. So don't sink too much time and effort or anything really into making a game so solid unless you are going to publish it yourself. In fact, a lot of times when we pitch games to people, we have the idea. So it's funny because Kingdom Rush, which, you know, is, like I said, it made over $1 million US in its Kickstarter, and then it's being sold obviously past that. We made it in a month. We made the game in a month, which is like, oh, okay, that doesn't sound very good. The thing is that we generated all the content for it over 18 months, right? So all the levels, all the different characters, all the different monsters in it, all the scenarios and setups, all the variable things like spells that you can have, that we developed over 18 months. But the core game loop was a couple weeks of work. And we didn't invest too much in it because we said, well, if it changes, I don't want to have to spend time and money and effort to make a new prototype every time we make a change. And trust me, we made a lot of changes. Like, I have a box over here, like I'll show you. So this is just one bag of stuff that I removed from, you can see it's Kingdom Rush, that I took out of the Kingdom Rush box, you know, after one playtest. I have, I think, 17 bags like this over there. And I bagged them, by the way, so I know what order I took them out, and they have a little note inside of them that says, take it out on this date. So I know if I need to put it back where everything belongs. That's all that's for. I actually don't pack anything in boxes. I actually pack everything in Ziploc bags for travel purposes, actually, because boxes are bulky. Publishers hate traveling with boxes because they're going home with, you know, maybe 5, 6, 7, 10 prototypes. So I always pack them in Ziploc bags with my business card in it, a sticker on it that tells them what it is. They can box it later if they want, but a lot of them just throw out boxes at the airport or in a hotel room while they're packing, right? What else is there? Adrian, usually solo mode is a very different game. At least it feels very different versus play with more players. In this situation, is it still worth it? Yes. Totally still worth it to make a solo mode. I don't know if you knew this, but the Solo Players Guild on Boardgame Geek is the second biggest guild out of all guilds. There are like 30,000 members on Boardgame Geek for solo games, and I bet it's just increased more and more due to this COVID situation, right? I see lots more people talking about playing solo. I hate playing solo. That's not why I play games, right? So I really believe that there is a big market for solo right now and into the future because more people are discovering them as something fun to do that they like to do when they have some time to do it. So yeah, it may feel different, but do some research into what people like about solo games, and you'll find that different may not be so bad. It just depends on what the type of game is. So yeah, yes, I think a solo mode that does have, you know, the same experience is easier to do because then you only have to sell one product. When the solo mode is vastly different, that becomes problematic. But if it's similar with some differences, I think that's okay. Let's see here, Francisco. For those of you who are first-time designers, any tip to increase your confidence? Play more games. Show your games to more people. Meet up with wonderful human beings like you have in front of you right now. Play virtually with them. Don't be afraid to share your game. So here's the thing. Do you guys know who Athena is? Pallas Athena. She's a Greek goddess. She sprung perfectly formed from Zeus's skull when it was split open. No game is that. Like, so there's another saying that, you know, no plan survives contact with the enemy. No prototype survives contact with a playtester. There are I think there might be 1 or 2 games that I've ever made in my life that we've done nothing to. Oh, no, only 1. Right? It was like, that's what it is, and that's all it could be right from the beginning. So we made no changes to it. But that's super rare. Like, I've made hundreds of games. So don't worry about that. Put your stuff out there. Put your stuff out for people to talk about, for people to see. If you inspire them, so what? Their game is going to be different than yours because you are a unique and special snowflake. No, you are an individual who is able to design games in a certain way. I bet you, how many of there are? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10. So there's 19 of us right now in the chat. I bet you if I said, hey, let's all make a game and the theme is going to be dungeon crawling, right? That's a really common, boring theme. We'd all make a completely different game. And then if I said, hey, let's all make a game that uses poker hands as the mechanics, we'd all make a different game. There are 19 different games that come out of that. And if I said, hey, let's all make a game where the core experience is tension, really high tension, we'd all have totally different games for that too, right? So don't worry about showing your game. In fact, a lot of people who are scared about showing their game are scared about people stealing their ideas. The fact is that the more you show it, the more evidence you have that it was your idea first, right? So show your game. Don't be afraid of that. If here's the thing. I think if I had just a kernel of an idea and I shared it and somebody made that game, I'd actually be happy because that means I don't have to make it. I can now just play that game and enjoy it instead of having to do all the work of making the game. I tend to share ideas widely when there's nothing to them. As soon as there's like parts and things and a license, that's when I actually literally usually can't show them because some publisher says, do not show that to anybody. So I can't. And that's sad because I want to. I do want to share, and people should share more. And I think anybody who's run a Kickstarter probably knows that sharing is literally just marketing for the final product, right? The more people you have, if you're going to Kickstart, the more people you have following you from day one, the more people feel like they're invested, the more people feel like they're part of this process, this ride they're going along on. They're part of it. They made some decisions. They might say, like, they might take their game when they buy it, say, this is a role I thought of. This is the place that I told Pepe that, no, dodos don't fly, Pepe. You shouldn't have them flying in your game. And he listened to me. This is such a great game, right? So that whole idea of sharing will help increase your confidence. Other thing, other than play more games and show your game out, is be involved in play testing. Play test other people's games. I actually have a ratio that I play test on. Like I will show one game for every 3 to 5 games that I play. I don't need to test my games. And I'm not saying that in a cocky way. I'm not saying like I don't need to test them because they're perfect. I'm saying I don't need to test my games that night. I literally don't. But some beginning designer who's never done anything like this, they really do need to get their game tested because they need to learn how to test a game, take feedback, make changes, iterate on stuff. And so I do them the favor of opening up this space. Because I guarantee you, if I went to a playtest night and said, hey, here's the latest game from, Sen and Jay, people would probably say, oh, let's play that instead of this game by this unknown designer, right? Because they would say, oh, that game's going to be more finished, probably work better, might be a more fun game than I don't know this guy, so we're not going to play their game. That's a known quality. That's an unknown quality. So when I walk into a game session, it's like, hey, who's got a game that they need to have tested? And if it's somebody who's new and unknown, especially if it's somebody who might be from a marginalized, group, like, there's not many women who design, which is unfortunate. I might say, oh, hey, great, let's play your game, and lead by example, right? So play test other people's games because it helps you actually become a better game designer, right? You'll start seeing the holes, the flaws in other people's games that you don't see in your own because you're just too close to it, right? You're too blinded by your own stuff, all that stuff that's going on. And when you sit back and you take an objective look at it, that's when you can see it. And when you're a play tester, you're being completely objective, or should be, right? So that is, I think, a really good way to get more confidence in that. What is the experience you want to give in games? Oh, that's a good question. So usually my big kind of overarching one that because I like to feel this, is cleverness. I want people to feel clever when they play my games, but that's not always the experience. That might be one of the emotions that I want you to feel. But I usually base the experience on a confluence of the theme and the mechanic, as I talked about before. So I usually use this when I'm designing for like an IP. So Batman, I designed the push your luck game for Batman, which was the villains. So I took all the villains. Jesse and I did this one. And so the idea here is saying, what would a villain want to feel like? Well, they definitely want to feel they're clever, but each villain was different, right? So I had Killer Croc, I had the Joker, Catwoman, Poison Ivy, and so each of them had to feel very different. And so my overarching thing was all these villains have to feel like the villains that they are in the cartoon. And so Killer Croc has powers where he becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. Bane, if you remember, Bane has the power where he can escalate and de-escalate his power levels at will, which is really actually very helpful in this particular game. You know, Poison Ivy has powers where she, I think, can't remember her powers. I think she causes things to grow in different ways. But yeah, so they're resonant with the theme, but that's the experience that I want at the high end, is that nobody's going to play this game and say, that doesn't play like I think Poison Ivy would play, or that's not what Joker would do. No, Joker would never do that. So you have to make your game feel like it's supposed to, right? In Akrotiri, for example, we wanted people to feel like they've discovered something brand new that's nobody ever found before. And so if you've ever played Akrotiri, Akrotiri is a game that's a tile-based game. So you're laying tiles out, random, not that are randomly gained, but in the end, it creates a map that actually is true. You're going, how does that happen? Well, it actually happened all the way from this. This is the game that had this crap game that I showed you guys at the beginning. This is a crap game that had one thing that we liked about it, which was the mechanic that we stole from this crap game to put into Akrotiri, which is like a critically acclaimed game. Because we wanted people to discover lands, discover places without that place actually existing already, right? In a tile laying game, you can imagine and understand that you're creating land masses out of nothing. So how could a place exist on that map that isn't directly, this is the treasure right here. So we made a system that is based on landmarks. So landmarks like mountains to the north, lakes to the south, trees to the east. If you could find a spot that is true, then that treasure is right there. Because pirate treasures were often like that, right? They were often things like 2 steps north from the palm tree, 5 steps to the east, dig your hole there, and that's where the treasure is. And so that was the experience that we wanted people to have, was the experience of discovery. And all the mechanisms lead to that. It's the map mechanism, the tile laying mechanism, that's all about discovery. And the only other mechanism in there is pick up and deliver. And the pick up and deliver was really just a way to power the economy to do all the other things. So you need to well, I mean, obviously, to go dig up treasure, you need to have an expedition, right? To have an expedition, you need to pay all those laborers. To pay all those laborers, you have to sell olive oils to Greece. That's obvious. That's just the way it works. And so, yeah, the experience in that one was discovery. Cool. All right. Well, you know what? I actually have to go teach a class. I have to teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's another thing that I teach. So I'm going to go teach people how to choke other people. And on that note, I guess that's it. So thank you so much for having me. Thanks for all the questions. They're wonderful. It was really nice to see a lot of people's faces today. It was lovely to talk to you all. So if you want to reach me on social media, definitely Facebook is the easiest way to find me. It's just my name, @Sen-Foong Lim. Oh, it's not an @ but I'll write it here. Full name, Sen-Foong Lim. And you can friend me on Facebook. I see all your names. I'll know that if it has, if it's from this group, I'll immediately accept you. Please do. And then Pepe, I'll send you that document for the elevator pitch and the sell sheet and stuff that you can share with the group. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you all later.
See you, Sen.
Thank you
so much.
Okay. No problem.
Great presentation.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.